you've ever agreed to do something that maybe sounded like a good idea at the time. But on the day when you actually had to do it, if you ever woke up with a sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach, asking yourself this question, what was I thinking? Well, that's me this morning. You see, when I was planning this month's Psalm series, I was excited. We heard God's voice 2 weeks ago, and we experienced God's love last Sunday, and I can't wait to dive into our text next week, which talks about what God's protection is like. But this Sunday is my sinking feeling. What are God's laws like? And what would my life be like if I took them seriously and chose to embrace and embody them? What was I thinking? In general, for those of you who have read the midweek message this past week, and for those of you who have known me for a while, you may know that I don't really like being bossed around. I know some of you are similar in your natures, and by nature, I am a free spirit. I am independent, I am anti-authoritarian, and perhaps due to my southern roots, I'm just a little bit of a rebel. I don't know if any of you can relate, but I have this idea that if there are rules, I would like to discuss them or renegotiate them. And if there are laws, I wonder if they really apply to me, or if there's perhaps not room for an exception in my case. So this morning is a lesson in irony and in preaching to the choir, or at least in preaching to the preacher. And so I find that I need the last verse of this psalm very much this morning. May the bumbling words of my mouth and the personal meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to God, our rock and our Redeemer. I've prayed that before a sermon before. You might have heard other preachers pray it. It's pretty common. And I know my favorite Southern Baptist preacher from back home, Anderson, South Carolina, was named Reverend Bill West. And Bill used to pray this prayer every morning when he got up in the pulpit, almost every morning. And so you can imagine my shock when I flipped open the Bible and found Bill's words, nearly word for word in Psalm 19. I mean, I didn't know plagiarism was acceptable in our field, but I guess, no, just kidding. If you're going to borrow a prayer, I think this one is a pretty good prayer to borrow. And Bill used to say these words right before he preached. And the psalmist today saves these words for the very end, at the very end of this special song. And I think there is power in both, in asking God to get me out of the way and speak words of truth to you, also in asking God to take whatever mess I just said and transform it into something that has meaning and power in your lives and is a call to action. The psalmist begins by explaining how God makes laws known, and in the first 6 verses, we learn that no words are necessary. Ever felt redundant or irrelevant? I do this morning. No words are necessary because the heavens and the beauty of our natural world shout out God's truths, and it is futile to resist the laws of nature because no matter what we want or what we think or how we feel, the sun rises each morning like an eager groom and races across the sky like a marathon runner before setting each evening, hopefully with a beautiful Bronco sunset of bright orange, pinks, and purples. No one can escape the sun's heat. Nothing can stop this natural law. And in the same way, we are governed by other natural laws. Among them, I find the law of inertia to be the most troubling. Now, for those of you who don't remember this from your school training, Sir Isaac Newton's first law of motion states that an object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion. And that seems simple enough until I try to get up off my couch and turn off Netflix and actually do something about all of the social injustice that weighs me down every day. Now, I don't know about you, but I think about social injustices all the time. I pray for friends and neighbors and church members and even people in news articles from all around the world who are suffering. And I talk about social justice a lot with my friends and my family and other clergy. We talk about poverty, about income equality, white privilege, human trafficking, LGBTQ rights, and even the global refugee crisis. I can fill up days and weeks and months wishing for and talking about what the world would be like if God's peace actually rained down. Today, many mainline Protestant denominations are declining, but I don't want to pastor a dying church. I assume you don't want to be a member of a dying church. I want to embrace God's winds of change and experience growth and revival. As a young child, I wished that I had been born earlier so that I could have marched in the civil rights movement and heard someone like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. give a speech or even a sermon that really made a difference in the world. I wanted to make a difference in the world. But last year, I had a young clergy friend from Boulder who booked a flight to Ferguson, Missouri, in the midst of the protests happening there. I wished her well, I prayed for her, and I listened to all of her stories when she got back. I was proud of her and of all the clergy on the front lines in Ferguson, in Baltimore, and in protest all around our country. But I did not go with her. I stayed at home. I was at rest, or at least I was not yet in motion. Because belief is not enough. Talking about it, thinking about it is not enough. I need something more that actually pushes me into action. Orthodoxy, which means right beliefs, will not change me or the world, even if I am right, or even if you are right. But orthopraxy, right actions, do have the power to change us as individuals, as a community, and the entire world. And right actions begin with a right understanding of the law of the Lord. Like it or not, this is the law of love. The psalmist describes God's laws here as perfect and sure, right and pure. They are clean, true, righteous, and sweet. They do not exclude anyone, but shine a light of focus on everyone, because we, all of us, the good guys and the bad guys, those of us in this room and everyone outside of this room, all of us are in need of mercy and of grace and of forgiveness and of healing. The benefits of living into these laws is also clearly stated in Psalm 19. And I long for myself as I long for you this list of gifts, a revived soul. What would that feel like? Wisdom, a heart full of rejoicing, eyes that are enlightened to see, endless purity, deep righteousness, which means being right with God and living according to God's plan for my life and not the way that I try to take control and make it happen. These descriptions are of a life of peace, a life of clarity, something that so many people in our world are seeking both inside and outside of today's churches. Knowing who we are and why we are here and what our greater purpose is in this crazy world. But even if we accept God's laws, these beliefs, we don't simply become God's people. We don't simply begin magically one day to embrace law or to begin to create God's kingdom here on earth. Even the final verses in this text say that we don't understand all of our own errors. We don't even know the ways that we hurt ourselves and other people around us. We have to ask God to clear away our hidden faults and to keep us from being insolent, which means arrogant or rude. We have to keep our ego from being in control and submit ourselves to God's will. And if we want to reap all of these fabulous benefits and live in the beauty and the truth of these laws, we must allow God to push us from belief into action. And that takes me back to Sir Isaac Newton. An object at rest will remain at rest unless an unbalanced force sets it in motion. I believe that God is that unbalanced force, and we all need a push sometimes. until God changes us, until God touches us, until God calls each and every one of us, which God does, not just those who serve in formal ministries, but every single person in the priesthood of all believers. Until we hear that call, until we have the courage to respond, we will remain at rest. And the church will remain in decline, and we will continue not to welcome the stranger and not to feed the hungry, and just to keep on whining. I don't know about you, but there is a lot of whining in my life with my 2-year-old. You know, Lillian hates to wear her child seat harness, and whenever I try to fasten her into the car, she whines and complains and asks why she has to wear it. And frustrated, often I say, "It's the law." As if that is a reason that makes any sense to a 2-year-old, or even a reason that would have compelled me to do what I'm supposed to do at age 10 or 20 or even 37. But so she keeps on wriggling and struggling and whining. But a few weeks ago, Regis was in the car with us when this typical drama was unfolding. And when she asked why, he said, "It's to keep you safe." And suddenly she just stopped. She stopped whining, she stopped fighting, and she let me fasten those seat belts over her chest with no complaints and no struggle. And I started to think, can I change my perspective and stop viewing God's laws, or in fact any or all laws, as an attempt to confine me, to restrict me, to squelch me, or to hold me back? Can I stop whining and reframe my own beliefs to accept that some laws, and especially God's laws, are there to protect me and to keep me safe? And maybe that's what God's laws are like. Maybe they are ways to show love and connection and protection. Do I still want to change the world like that starry-eyed teenager that I used to be? Absolutely. And do I still find excuses and cop-outs and a million reasons why I cannot start today? I sure do. But the good news is the sun will set today on my failures, and it will rise again tomorrow and offer me another chance. And each day I pray that I may become less at rest, more restless even, until the day that I feel God pushing and I set off rolling in motion, and I'm on the right path at the right time in the right place, following, embracing God's laws and being transformed and making a real difference in our world. And that is not just my prayer for myself, but also my prayer for you. Amen. Amen.